Black Politics Today, an eye for what's at stake in global politics and your source for the social, economic, and political impact of public policy on the African American community. Your host, Kelly Michael Williams, is a political strategy veteran with an undefeated campaign record and the political experience that spans nearly 3 decades, from Mayor Willie Brown in California to President Barack Obama in our nation's capital. So get ready for a fresh and honest approach on the politics that affect you and your family the most. Now, your host, Kelly Michael Williams.
Hello. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Kelly Michael Williams. Thank you for joining us tonight for What's at Stake right here on Black Politics Today. I appreciate you guys joining us again tonight. And certainly, as we do each and every week, we're always appreciative of our guests. We thank our Lord and Savior. And we just want to make sure that we try to get out there and talk about what's happening right now, what's going on across the country. What's happening in our neck of the woods? What's happening, in our city, in our state? That meaning your city and your state, that is, and what's happening, right here in Washington D.C. and across the country. There's so much in the news. We got the raid last week. At the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, I think it was, you had the raid on New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani's apartment and his Manhattan offices, which is an irony, a good one in my opinion, because you had the Southern District of New York serving a search warrant on the former federal prosecutor of the Southern District of New York. Now, if that's not irony, I don't know what is. But that just tells you, I love it. That just tells you, if you talk mess, tell lies, thwart our democracy, violate federal laws with the arrogance of immunity, because you got your boy Donald Trump around or Bill Barr, and their butts ain't around no more, guess what? You're going to find your behind in a search warrant. And that search warrant is going to take all your devices and look up everything you got. And if you thought you got rid of everything, guess again, because you probably didn't get rid of nothing. But you know what they say? What goes around comes around. Karma's up. Yeah. So when Donald Trump ain't around for you, he can't tell Bill Barr, go ahead and, stop that search warrant from coming through, go ahead and squash that search warrant, let's think about it. He's had 8 people get charged, indicted, and go to prison, and 4 more who didn't get indicted, but should have, but because Bill Barr stopped it, they didn't get indicted. The Interior Secretary, the Transportation Secretary, the Housing Secretary, and the Secretary of State. And who else? There's one more. I missed one. That's 5. I missed one. It's going to come to me. But yeah, you got all those folks. And the worst case, in my opinion, was Elaine Chao, Mitch McConnell's wife. She has the only company in Texas that does street graveling. Kentucky. The only company in Kentucky that does, or in Louisville possibly, that does the lays down the gravel and everything, the tar for the street, to repave the street. She gave her own company a $200 million or $2 billion contract in 2019 to repave the roads in Kentucky. And the IG of transportation had filed a complaint against her and sent it to the Justice Department, and they squashed it and said they're not going to indict, they're not going to investigate, they're not going to do anything about it. Just before she left office. They squashed it January 2021, sometime in January. Oh, we're not going to do anything with this. Now, of course, if that was under Obama, it would have been up, or if Hillary was in, that would have been up. Even her own agency, her own attorney general would have been like, no, go ahead and investigate that. Go ahead and, whoever it is, they would have gone under investigation. It would have been news everywhere. But you didn't hear anything about that, did you? I bet you none of you heard anything about that at all, because they squashed it. Good news, on the other hand, Biden had his address to the nation and talked about infrastructure, talked about free education for college, free community college tuition, no college tuition. Also expanding the pre-K to start at 3 years old, free of charge, to give you free education on the front end, 2 free years on the back end, and also free childcare, something everyone was raving about. Republicans were even raving about it because, they're mothers too. But then he's also talking about the infrastructure bill and how he's going to pay for that, raising taxes on corporations. You all heard 55 companies didn't pay any taxes. Another 200 companies paid very little taxes, if, whatsoever. And these fools are talking about, well, we're not going to raise any taxes on corporations. They don't pay anything. You're not raising any taxes on them. They don't pay anything. Okay. What you got to do is now make sure they pay and enforce them to pay, because they're using loopholes, foreign offshore accounts to funnel their money into. But here's the thing. So you have all these companies that don't they don't pay any taxes. They hire, they send their company's product workload to foreign countries. They send them out to foreign countries, right? And then what they do is that they send them to foreign countries, but they don't want the foreigners to come into our country. See, they want to pay them in their country, but they don't want to pay them in our country, right? So you got the foreign workers for the companies that are American companies, because they don't want to pay Americans any money, but they're like, oh, sure, we'll pay the foreigners some money in their country, but we don't want to pay them here because it's cheaper in their country than it is here, right? So you got that going on. But what I love about this is that you got the George Floyd Justice, what is it called? George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. He talked about that. He endorsed that. He wanted to put that out there. You got HR 1 and you got the John Lewis Voting Act. 2 things that he really pushed and pressed upon doing. And then you have Senator Cory Booker, Congresswoman Karen Bass, and Senator America's Not a Racist Country, Tim Scott, all out there working to get this legislation put in place and the law. And we'll see what happens. If this law had been put in place before, you would think and you would hope that a lot of the killings that we've had with George Floyd and others would not have occurred, because I think the idea of the pressure would have caused some law enforcement officers to think twice. But for right now, we're living in an uncertain reality with no end in sight, and we don't know what's to come. So the question is, what's next? What will come about from the Chauvin conviction? What will come about from Andrew Brown's death and funeral today? What will come about from the infrastructure bill? And more importantly, what will come about from the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act? Or better yet, what's going to come about from the investigation and prosecution of Rudy Giuliani and them 6 and the January 6th white supremacists? They say they got 500 of them Bamas. 500 of them they prosecuting. I hope they prosecute them all for more than just trespassing. They got to get them all, more than trespassing, any of that. But if we think about the George Floyd Policing Act, if that's in place, would Andrew Brown be dead today? Would Dante Wright be dead today? Think about that. I think the consequences and the liability that bill puts out there would cause them to think twice about making that decision about shooting an unarmed man because he was jaywalking in California, or because he was driving away in North Carolina, or because he thought, or you thought, he passed a $20 bill, counterfeit, that did not require an arrest. Any of those things, what would have happened? Joining me tonight, my guest can speak directly to the impact of such legislation as a Black man, but also as a law enforcement officer. He is none other than my good friend from Durham, North Carolina, Sheriff Clarence Burkhead. He's the first African-American in Durham County history to be sheriff in the 140-year history of the city, of the county. And he's a 35-year police officer veteran. He serves, he's been serving for Durham County Sheriff for the last 3 years, coming up for re-election next year, and defeated an incumbent 20-year, I think it was 25-year incumbent Republican. And we are going to be ecstatic and supportive of him and keep him all the way live up there in Durham. He ain't going nowhere. He won with 93% of the vote. This time we're going to get him up to 98 or 99, okay? Because he's been doing a hell of a job down there. I'm excited for him. I'm proud of him. I'm glad to call him friend. I'm glad he calls me friend, you know? And we want to welcome him to the show because certainly I appreciate the man that's sitting there. Look at him. Look at him. He ain't even got on a uniform. He's suited in. Look at him, man. Look at him. Sheriff Burkhead, what's up, my brother?
Good evening, Kelly Michael. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate those kind words. Yeah, we're trying to make a difference here in Durham County, North Carolina, and as you said in your monologue, yeah, things are getting kind of crazy, but we're going to keep our finger on the pulse and keep our eye on the prize as we work toward criminal justice reform.
That's what we got to do. If you want to join the conversation, give us a call at 516-590-0143. That's 516-590-0143. Or if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can hit us up in the comments section and we'll make sure we get to your comment or question at that time. So, of course, thank you for joining us. And let me get to it, Sheriff. You're doing well. You're doing some good stuff out there. I saw your letter. Excellent letter. And I really appreciate you putting that out there. Tell our viewers and listeners about that you actually put out a formal statement on the Chauvin decision.
Yeah, no, you know, Kelly Michael, when the tragic incident happened to Mr. Floyd, I just couldn't sit silent. We cannot continue to sit on the sidelines and shake our heads. As leaders, we need to use our platform to get the message out that we are not going to stand for this anymore. I'm in my 38th year as a law enforcement professional, and far too long, those officers who abuse the power that has been given to us by our oath, who take for granted the trust of the community, we can no longer stand by and accept that. I put that letter out in support of the family and hoping that this will be the verdict, hoping that the verdict will now be a true step in the right direction of the criminal justice reform. I take this very seriously. I tell all of my colleagues here in North Carolina, in order for us to make a difference, we're going to have to start holding law enforcement officers accountable for their misdeeds. And I've always said, if you break the law, it doesn't matter whether you wear the blue or not. You should be held to the same standard. And that's what I'm pushing for. And I know some of the language in the George Floyd Policing Act makes that even more possible. So I think it is time for us to stand up and really push for the change that is needed.
That's a powerful position and statement for you to make, especially being in law enforcement, because a lot of folks that you govern over, if you will, in Durham County, a lot of them African American, would probably look to say, well, on one hand, we want you to do that, but then on the other hand, will you really do it? And you set the record straight by putting a statement out there saying, hey, look, I'm supporting good cops, clean cops. I'm not supporting bad cops or dirty cops or cops that have issues with policing.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a testament to you and your leadership, and also to your department and agency, that you can do that and you feel strong enough and powerful enough to do that, and not necessarily allow the politics to get involved in it, but letting the governance of the office get into it, because you are the law enforcement officer of the county.
Yeah, that's correct. I am an elected official, and I am up for re-election next year. And I think it is more incumbent upon me as an elected official to use my pulpit or my platform to get this message out. And if not us, who will stand up and hold these officers accountable? I prefer to lead by example, and I'm going to be out front leading the charge on criminal justice reform. All the deputies, the men and women who work for me, know that if they do wrong, I will be the first to march them into the DA's office or to the magistrate's office. As long as they do their job the way they're supposed to, I will fight for them tooth and nail to support them, and they know that. And I told them when I got elected by that 93% that you mentioned earlier, there are two things I promised them: that I would be fair and consistent, and you can't ask for any more. And so far they've been pleased with that. And this is where I draw the line: wrongdoing, breaking the law, mistreating the public will not be tolerated. And that's the message that is resonating through the Durham County Sheriff's Office.
I'm proud of you. I'm real proud of you, and I appreciate you doing that. I've been getting and receiving your press releases, and a lot of the things that's going on, and it seems that has been relaxed and things have gone on in the state. Crime has come back. I mean, it's like, when you're under that pandemic, I guess they said, well, I better keep my behind at home so I don't get sick, right? No. But then as soon as it opens up, they get back out there committing all these crazy crimes. How's that going, and how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, it is unfortunate right now. Durham City and Durham County is experiencing unprecedented gun violence. And you're correct. There, for the first 2 or 3 months of dealing with the coronavirus, people stayed in. People were afraid of what was happening. People were dying left and right. But crime never took a break, to be honest. We saw a slight dip, but that dip is no longer realized. Shootings are record setting, and last year and this year in 2021, unfortunately, we're already on pace to set or break another record. Gun violence is very prevalent, and so we're doing all we can to focus on the violent crime offenders and identify them and get them off our streets. And that's my goal. I don't have time to chase petty offenders, and again, not discounting someone being victimized by petty crime or shoplifting or anything of that nature, but I've got people dying in my county. I've got young Black men and women dying in my county from gunshots and from stray bullets. Some of them, a young lady, 16 years old, laying in her bed, was struck by a stray bullet. That's unacceptable. So we're working with the city of Durham as much as possible to get these violent offenders identified and get them off the streets.
Now, in areas of your city, do you have cameras like here in DC, in quote unquote Southeast, and parts of Northeast? They have the camera set up, or the gunshot sensors, so that when you hear gunfire going off the gunshot, it triggers the camera or that nature. And then, of course, it notifies the officers that are in the vicinity, and they're able to get there a lot sooner rather than waiting for that 911 call. Do you have that capabilities in Durham County? Is that something that you're looking for from either the state legislature or the county council or anything like that?
No, unfortunately, we don't have the shot spotter technology, is what you're referring to. It has been successful in a number of jurisdictions across the country and in the district. We are on slate to pilot a program, the Shot Spotter program. I'm hopeful that it will get into the city sooner rather than later. But right now, we don't have that capability. So we're still doing law enforcement the old-fashioned way: pick up the phone, build those relationships with our residents, have them to call 911, and then we respond as quick as possible and investigate. We want to use technology such as ShotSpotter. We want to expand our video surveillance around the city. Not so much in the county, but certainly within the city boundaries. We'd like to do that. So I'm optimistic that once this pilot program is realized with ShotSpotter, the city will move in that direction, and the communities will benefit from having that technology in place.
That'd be good. I know that it is something that they use here in DC, and I know in other major cities they do that, where there's quote unquote high crime area or a lot of gunfire, things like that. They put those in place to utilize that. What's the antidote that you have or that you're looking at post COVID to deal with your crime, and what's the agency looking at in terms of how to get that under control? Because I know it's a tough job for you, especially coming out of COVID, having to deal with COVID, and then dealing with the jails, and having to deal with your inmates in COVID, and then also patrolling the streets and having to deal with the violence and the rise in gun violence. What's the antidote? What do we have to do? Is it jobs? Is it education? Is it just the getting the guns off the street, which of course is obvious, but what else is there out there that you can do and use to try to help yourself and help the county to get this violence under control?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Listen, when I put on my political hat, I advocate for responsible gun ownership, because a lot of the weapons that are ending up on the streets of Durham and Durham County are stolen from lawful owners. Right. But there are no consequences. Okay, if you're going to own a weapon, you have to be responsible for it. You need to secure that weapon. Don't leave it in the vehicle. And a lot of the weapons that we're seeing and that we're seizing after they've been involved in a crime, commission of a crime, were stolen out of a vehicle, or stolen out of a purse, or stolen out of the home. So I push for responsible gun ownership. I also push for red flag laws. We know that not everyone should be able to purchase a firearm. Those who have a cognitive disability should not be able to purchase a firearm without the proper vetting through both the medical society and the mental health society before they can go out and purchase a weapon. So I push for those red flag laws as I'm working with my legislative delegation here from Durham County over in the General Assembly. I think we have to approach this gun violence issue from a multi-pronged approach. From the law enforcement side, we put together a strike team. That strike team is designed to focus solely on violent offenders and felonious acts of crime. Again, we're not chasing the nickel bag guy selling on the corner. That's important to the quality of life of that neighborhood, but it's more important for me to protect life and property before I chase down a small-time drug dealer, so to speak. So we're utilizing our strike team. We have MOUs in place. We're working with all of our state, local, and federal partners to attack this, and hopefully identify these individuals, apprehend them, and give the DA or the U.S. Attorney's Office the best opportunity for conviction and get these folks off the street. And that's what it's going to take. We have to take a hard line. And I know in this day and in this climate, a hard line from law enforcement may not be palatable to everyone.
Right.
But again, I've got young people dying in my streets, and I just can't stand back and let that happen. So we're going to be very aggressive at identifying these individuals, and we're going to make some people uncomfortable in Durham, North Carolina, when they commit a violent crime, particularly using a firearm.
And that's the way. That's the way it should be. And you spoke about drug offenses. I recently saw article that 80%. No, I do that back. 65%. I think it's more than half of those that are incarcerated in federal prisons are there for small-time drug offenses. And it's crazy because what I don't think most people understand is that our taxpayer dollars are going to pay for that petty thief or a petty drug dealer, that in some cases the use of the drug is a symptom of something else other than the idea of just getting high. I mean, you have the opioids folks using the painkillers the same way the marijuana or the crack or the cocaine user is using those substances. It's all medicating a bigger issue or something else going on, but yet we're spending billions of dollars to privatize the prisons to give these people money to house and put them in jail and prison for short stints of time. But if they get 3 strikes, they're there for, 25 years to life and things of that nature because it's a felony. But the private prisons, they're requiring these states to give them a certain number of people for them to put in the prison. And if they don't, then the state has to pay them for what they didn't promise them. So your state, if your state promised 20,000 inmates and they only gave them 15,000, the state then has to pay the prison for the other 5,000 that they didn't put in jail.
Right.
That's crazy.
Right. I agree. Yeah, look, I agree. Again, that's another facet of our criminal justice system that must be reformed. I made it very clear coming into office that I was going to take a backseat on enforcing marijuana laws. Let's talk about marijuana, because a lot of these young men and women went to prison, have gone to prison, are still in prison for selling marijuana. Mm-hmm. We know that a number of states, I can't remember the number right now, have already legalized marijuana. North Carolina, we've relaxed our marijuana laws, and I'm convinced that one day in the near future, it'll be legal for recreational use in North Carolina as well. My point is, we have more serious things to worry about than low-level drug offenses. Right. Home invasions, kidnappings, assaults, as I've already mentioned, gun violence is out of control. As responsible law enforcement, we need to focus on those issues that continue to rip away at the fabric of life here in Durham. We've already had 17 homicides this year. Now, that may not sound like a lot for the DC area, but here in North Carolina, that's a lot. That we've already had 17 murders this year. And that puts us on track to surpass what happened last year. Last year, we had over 300 shootings in Durham County. That's unacceptable. If you want to find a silver lining, they're not very good shots, so only 158 of those folks got hit. But what happens when a bullet leaves the gun is unpredictable. As I mentioned earlier, the 14-year-old lying in bed, bullet came right through her room, struck her in the leg. I have senior citizens calling me on a regular basis saying, "Sheriff, I hear gunshots and I have to dive into the bathtub or I have to fall out of the bed on the floor." Mm-hmm. That is unacceptable for anyone's mother or grandmother to have to live that way in constant fear of gun violence. So again, I know I keep saying it. That's my focus. That's one of the things I'm focusing on right now because that's what we're dealing with. And certainly not to overshadow everything else that's going on in the country, from Minneapolis to right here in Elizabeth City. We certainly cannot overshadow these tragedies as well when we talk about criminal justice reform.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, Andrew Brown's funeral was today, and the things are becoming more and more suspicious on the outside looking in because of the fact that the police haven't released the body cams, and then they only showed the family 20 seconds of the body cam from one body camera and not the entire footage. And the judge, last week said that it was supposed to be released to the family, but apparently they still haven't seen it yet. What's the reality? Talk to our viewers and tell us what the reality is. You as a sheriff, do you have the ability to release that body cam footage on your own, or do you have to go through the courts to do so?
Well, in North Carolina, it requires a court order to get the body cam released. And there is legislation that has been proposed to repeal or to relax that standard, but that is the standard as of today. So the DA was appropriate in letting a judge decide. And I know we can debate, the judge made a decision with the information. We can debate that all day, but that is the law. So what I'll say is the sheriff of Durham County, we believe in transparency, obviously. And it's one of the pillars of my campaign is to be transparent and engage the community on every front and then hold ourselves accountable. So I would say this as it relates to body camera: work with my DA, work with the prosecutor's office, and at the appropriate time, release the video. And the appropriate time to me is sooner the better.
Right.
If you can get that out, good, bad, or indifferent. If it's bad, you're going to have to eat it anyway. Right. You need to get out in front of it, and you need to let people know that things happen. And, we're going to be transparent in how we work through it. And certainly if it's not as bad as some people think it is, get that out. So I would say the sooner you can get it out, the better. But right now we are sort of constrained by state law.
That's problematic, I think, for many in the community, because their automatic instinct, especially given the climate of police and community relations right now in America, is that there's manipulation going on with the video. There's something happening with the video, or as you said, they're trying to get their story straight because George Floyd, he had a medical emergency and then died and passed away. We found out what induced that medical emergency was a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, which they conveniently left out. So just as you're saying, they need to get out in front of it if it was wrong. It sounds like it was wrong. Because as I said, we were discussing last week, Supreme Court precedent already says that even if he is a fleeing felon, you can shoot at him in a vehicle or in a car. And most police departments or for law enforcement agencies tell you not to shoot at a vehicle unless there's imminent danger, because that stray bullet that you talked about can go anywhere, ricochet or something of that nature, and hit innocent bystanders. What are the policies there in Germany about shooting at vehicles on a local level, knowing what the federal level has already said?
No, we follow the law. I have a policy in place. We don't shoot at fleeing vehicles or suspects unless we can identify an imminent threat. That's the standard. That's the use of force standard. If we can identify that, but we don't shoot at vehicles unless they're coming at us, and that's an imminent threat. We don't shoot out the window of vehicles. We don't have any, none of this, TV stuff, and you don't try to shoot out the tires and things like that. Use of force policies are very clear. And here at the Durham County Sheriff's Office, we have a very clear use of force policy. And use of force is only justified in the face of imminent threat or deadly force itself. So training is critical. And you can't train enough. So when you've trained all you think you can train, then train again. But not only train in the proficiency of the firearm, but we have to train our mind. We have to exercise our thought process. So when we have 5, 6, or 7 deputies roll up to a scene, there has to be cooler heads. Right. And as the law enforcement professionals, we have to be able to make split-second decisions, but we also have to gather as much information as we possibly can to either A, identify a threat, or not identify a threat, and take the appropriate action. And so I advocate training all the time, but I also advocate mental toughness and having an acute awareness of what you are doing and what the situation is around you. So I want my officers to have a strong, sharp mind as much as I want them to be able to hit the target, to use that analogy. But I think we have to be clear on the cognitive abilities of our deputies when we put them in these stressful situations.
One thing I was curious about and wanted to, and I'm glad I have you today to ask you, is the terms of the academy and when they're going through the academy. I know from my own experience is that when they were showing videos and we saw a lot of African Americans in those videos being, depicting the crimes that we are to be looking for, from the gun shooting to the drugs to whatever suspicious. It was very few where you had the white suspect in there, and those cases were usually like rapes and child molestation. They sort of categorized them or showed us what they wanted us to see based on the crimes they basically assessed the individuals would be committing. If it was drug offenses, we saw African Americans. If it was guns, we saw African Americans. If it was personal rapes or child molestation, we saw white offenders. Or white collar crimes, it was white offenders, things of that nature. Do you have any ability to change the depictions in the academy so that changes the depiction in the minds of the officers? So when they're going out on the street, they're not already assuming that this guy is dirty, this guy is bad. They can come with a clean mind until they see something that changes their mind.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to say here in North Carolina at our Justice Academy, several years ago, they took a very concerted effort not to always show the black offender. And we have conversations about that through our implicit bias training, our bias-based policing model. We try to remove that color, so to speak, or and really talk about how we police the human being and how we see the individual, black or white, as a human. So the training videos, as you said, are often skewed toward a black offender, but in North Carolina, we've done a really good job of trying to reverse that and show a more realistic picture based on our society. So I think we're moving in the right direction. And the other piece of that is the implicit bias that I mentioned. We have to work on our mindset, because we all know that we're not born with these ideologies, with these divisive attitudes, and with this racist tone. But it's learned behavior. So yeah, if we learned that behavior at a very young age, we certainly can over time unlearn it and change the behavior. And that's what we're doing here through some of our training. We all go through CIT training here, so we can recognize when someone's having a mental health crisis or dealing with an addiction, so we don't continue to criminalize the illness that they're dealing with. So CIT training, and I've already mentioned implicit bias and bias-based policing training that we go through as well here. So we got to train the whole deputy, just like we train them to be physical and defend themselves. We got to train them to recognize and get back in touch with the human side of law enforcement. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to protect and serve. We've got to get away from being the warrior and get back to the guardian mentality. You've heard me say that before. And when we do that, we're better served and better equipped to serve our public. And that's what I'm pushing here in Durham.
That's great, Sheriff. And when you think about it from, you look at the Andrew Brown case and things like that, do you think there needs to be a universal policy for investigating police-involved shootings? And does that need to come from, should that be like across the board, a federal type of law that goes across the board so that everyone knows what to expect in every state, because it's universal? It's not going to be something over here and then something over there. And the idea is that state can switch up and change, and you can have a county attorney saying, no, you can't do this, but they're not even the prosecuting attorney, where you have the district attorney nowhere around, i.e. the Andrew Brown case. Should there be something universal out there? That way everyone knows exactly what it's supposed to be anywhere you go.
I think that's a great idea. And the more uniform we can be in handling these cases, the more the public will trust the process. I'm very proud of our governor, Roy Cooper, here in North Carolina, who a few days ago called for a special prosecutor. Going to work with the Attorney General's office here in North Carolina to identify a special prosecutor. That's what happened in Minneapolis. So I think if that is going to be the norm in handling these cases, I certainly support it. And it makes sense that it would be uniform, particularly when you have officer-involved shooting where someone's taken a life. And again, these cases have historically not been dealt with.
Right.
So I would love to see sweeping state legislation or federal legislation that says all officer-involved shootings will at least be screened by a special prosecutor and have the opportunity to have an unbiased look, or someone who's not in the local criminal justice system take a look at it. So if something like that were to be proposed, I certainly could get behind it. And again, it's all in being transparent and making sure that we hold everyone to the same standard of law that we're all subject to. Absolutely.
I think so as well. When you think about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and what it calls for, do you feel that if it passed, it would reduce the number of unarmed Black men being killed by law enforcement?
I heard you mention that in your opening comments, and I would like to think that passing an act that strips away some of the cover, qualified immunity, would have an impact, and I think it will have an impact. But I think what's going to stop young Black men from getting assaulted or getting shot and killed by law enforcement, I think it's going to take two things. It's going to take the community getting involved with law enforcement, number one, because we got to rebuild this relationship. We got to change the narrative. We got to change how law enforcement are viewed in the community, and vice versa. We got to change how the community views law enforcement. And number one, we have to let these officers know that you'll be held accountable for your actions. Right. And we as CEOs and police executives, whether you be a sheriff or a chief, we have to do a better job of identifying those men and women in our ranks who have those tendencies. And if we pay attention to them, we use an early warning system here at the Durham County Sheriff's Office. If you get X number of complaints over a defined period of time, we pull you in for a conversation. We'll review all of the use of force that you've been involved in. If I need to, I'll send you off for fitness of duty. And if I'm not satisfied at that point, we'll sideline you till we find out what's going on, or that you're okay to carry that weapon and to be out in the public. So again, it's back to treating the whole officer. I want to see the George Floyd Justice Act pass. But I don't think it's going to be a game changer for me. I think I'm the game changer. As President Obama said, I am the change that I seek. And I think it's going to be up to other sheriffs and chiefs of police and superintendents all across the country to set the stage that enough is enough. And these acts will not be tolerated. Then we have to back it up.
I think so. I think that's exactly what has to happen. I think that the biggest piece of that is the qualified immunity, and taking that off and making sure that they understand that they can be held accountable does put some awareness back into the game. Because I think when you know that you have qualified immunity and you basically govern with impunity, there's no consequences for you.
Yeah, I agree. And let me jump in right here, because a lot of people get confused about qualified immunity. A qualified immunity keeps you from being sued.
Right.
Okay. does not prevent you from being prosecuted criminally.
Right.
Okay. And if you are like Derek Chauvin, prosecuted, convicted, and going to go to prison, then the civil lawsuit's going to come regardless. So because all immunity has been lost at that point. But I want to see a harder line on prosecuting those acts that are clearly unlawful. Shooting of an unarmed suspect in the back, or whatever the case may be. You can name a list of them.
Right.
But for me, if the elements fit the law, and it is identified that you broke the law, whether you wear blue, gray, or a suit like I do, and you're a law enforcement officer, you take the life of another, you should be held to the same standard, and you should be prosecuted. That's just the way it is. And when we take that stance and we start seeing these wrongdoers, because they're not officers, they're wrongdoers, okay, prosecuted, to me, that's the game changer.
Absolutely. Let me ask you about this. The rumors about Laura Trump circling the wagon, coming out there running for Senate. Is there somebody lined up to go against whoever it is that's going to run on the Democratic side that we can actually, promote, because that Senate is going to be very key to what comes up in 2022 for the Supreme Courts, the federal courts, for infrastructure, for HR 1, for the John Lewis Act, for George Floyd Act. What's the landscape out there for that Senate race coming up in 2022?
Well, I have not heard that Laura Trump is thinking about it, but I know there are a lot of my colleagues, and some close to, some I'm not so close to, who are jockeying to run for Senator Burr's seat. And so I think that field will be crowded in the primary. And then I think on both sides, on the Republican and the Democratic side. And I think that will be a race that we need to watch here, certainly in North Carolina. And yeah, they are lining up to run for that seat that vacated by Senator Burr.
Now, is the governor's race up also in 2022, or is that 2024?
24.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about this infrastructure bill that the president put out there and is talking about taking across the country. How would that infrastructure bill help you? Do you see it? Do you like it? What will it do for Durham County, and what will it do for the state of North Carolina?
Well, it will not have a direct impact on law enforcement, but here's what it will do. It'll create jobs. And it will create much needed infrastructure repair in North Carolina. We know that some of our bridges are well past their life expectancy, so we need to strengthen our bridges and our roads, our highways here and in North Carolina. And so I think, and we have a seaport as well. So we've got railway, we've got the highways, and we have seaports here in North Carolina. So I think the infrastructure bill is a good bill. It's expensive, but when we have neglected the infrastructure in this country for 50, 60 years, it's going to be expensive to repair that. So I certainly applaud President Biden for putting that bill together, he and his staff, and I'm optimistic that it will get some traction. I'm really happy to hear that there is some bipartisan support now, maybe, and folks are starting to loosen up a little bit and maybe present a compromise. But in North Carolina, we think it would be a really good thing.
That's the thing, Chair. I don't get the GOP and Republicans in a whole lot of areas, but this is one that I just don't understand. We haven't done anything to our infrastructure in over 60 years. Now, when we had the New Deal, right? That was game changing to create an infrastructure in the highways and the railways, and to strengthen them and move forward. There hasn't been anything in 60 years. So now we're trying to do something. It's going to cost $600 billion. I mean, we have to recognize too that infrastructure isn't just the roads any longer, because we have technology. We saw that with COVID. So with COVID alone, infrastructure is broadband.
Right.
Infrastructure is, being able to develop and work from home and do the things you need to do. But infrastructure is childcare, in my opinion, because if you don't have childcare, you can't get to work. So it doesn't matter how many roads you build, you can't drive down them because you're sitting at home trying to take care of your kids.
Right.
So those things, we have to think beyond the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But it's ironic that when Trump was in office and they were talking infrastructure, they were talking more than 600 billion then. They were talking at least $1 trillion then. And Trump, I think, even floated around $2 trillion himself. So now they're like, oh no, that's too much money. We can only do 600 billion. You know what I really want to say? I want to slap they behind so bad.
No, I agree with you. And we did experience that with COVID. We saw what happened, and we know the populations that are most impacted by not having broadband, by not having the a device that you could do remote learning on. So yeah, infrastructure has changed over the past 50 years. And we certainly need to look at our technology and really we've been talking about broadband in North Carolina in our rural areas of the state for years. Yeah. And we're not there yet. So again, I'm hopeful that the bill will pass and we'll be able to do some of these things for the next generation, because that's what we're planning for.
Right. Yeah. Right. So what's at stake for us, Sheriff? What do we have to look for? What do we have to be concerned about? And what's going to impact Black folks or Black community the most?
Yeah, our existence is at stake. I've already talked about the young lives that we're losing in the streets of Durham County and Durham City day in and day out. Our lives are at stake. If we don't get a handle on the issues that are plaguing our communities, and the way we do that is we work with our communities. I'm just afraid that we're going to continue to lose young Black lives. And on the political front, again, our existence is at stake. A lot of the infrastructure bill is putting money and much needed upgrades in the Black and brown community. To me, if we don't put men and women in office who are going to support these types of initiatives, our existence is at stake for Black America. And as you said in your opening comments, as the first Black sheriff of Durham County in its 139-year history, I think it is incumbent on me to champion these causes as much as I champion responsible gun ownership and law enforcement that is professional and draped in integrity and transparency. I have to advocate for the Black and brown communities that are continuing to be plagued by all of these. We saw it in COVID. They couldn't get the vaccines and the help that they need, the food deserts that we deal with. So our mere existence is at stake moving forward if we don't get out and vote and be engaged at some level. And we know all politics is local politics.
Right.
So that's what's at stake for us.
Well, Sheriff, as always, man, I greatly appreciate you. It's always a pleasure to have you. You're always so insightful and knowledgeable about everything we talk about. Doesn't matter what we talk about. So I appreciate you, my brother. And I love the fact that we can get you here on our Mondays every other month and have you help us understand exactly what's going on in the law enforcement community across the world. Man, they blowing you up, bro. They blowing you up. So I won't hold you, but I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to seeing you. If I don't get out there to help you, maybe you can come out here and help me. All right. And
sounds like a plan. Yes, and I always appreciate it. Yes.
All right.
Stay safe.
I will, Sheriff. You take care. Black America, as the sheriff said, it's our existence. It's our very existence is at stake. And we have to make sure not only we get out there, register and vote, we participate, but we have to get on these senators and these congressional members and talk about this new infrastructure. We don't have just roads and bridges that we have to fix in airports. We have communities we have to fix. And so we have to go about doing that in a new way. Just like the New Deal came out, we have to get a new deal for us as well here with the new infrastructure. So don't sit back and don't wait. Get involved. I heard it recently, and the sheriff said something to me earlier. They talked about, and my thing is that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I am going to be the change that I want to see. You need to be the change that you want to see. And it doesn't matter how little you think it is or how small it may be. Get out there and do something. Because if you get yourself together, your neighbor together, your son or daughter, your husband or wife, whatever, the two of you, the three, I think the scripture is one to flee 10,000, two is one to flee 1,000, two will flee 10,000. So just get two. Just get two and flee 10,000. Get out there and do something about it. Until next week, if it's social, economic, or political, it's Black Politics Today. Sheriff, I love you, my brother. Look forward to seeing you again real soon, and we'll take care. And I want to get you back, and I'm sure I will.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Be good, everybody. Take care.